UrbanTalk would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and the traditional owners of the land on which we record this podcast, the Gadigal of the Eora Nation. We recognise their continued connection to country and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to the UrbanTalk podcast, the show where we bring together communities, planners, developers and fresh ideas to shape the cities we all call home. UrbanTalk is all about bridging the gap between the industry professionals building our neighbourhoods and the communities living in them. We're here to make conversations about urban development transparent, accessible and we hope exciting. In each episode, we'll unpack the issues, challenges and visions that shape our cities. I'm your host, Belinda Barnett. In this episode, we'll be discussing the livability of our cities with a focus on how we can introduce nature and green infrastructure into the built environment, how we can get people actively moving seamlessly through our city centres, and the impact that high-density living can have on children. While it's imperative that our governments prioritise housing supply, it's also imperative that we do so without eroding the livability of our cities. After all, we don't want to get a decade down the track and find that the decisions we've taken today in trying to get on top of the housing crisis have had adverse and irreversible implications on our cities. To discuss this topic, we're joined by Jua Cilliers, Professor of Urban Planning and Associate Dean of Research in the Faculty of Design and Society at the University of Technology. With over 2 decades of experience as a professional urban planner, Jua served as the Director of the UTS Green Infrastructure Lab and now leads public workshops, symposia and industry training events to share her research expertise. We're delighted to have her sharing some of that knowledge with us today. Welcome, Jua.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to be here.
Can you start by telling us about your roles at UTS and a brief overview of some of the work that you've been involved with?
Sure. I'm an urban planner by background. I started at UTS in the School of Built Environment. That's basically construction, project management, property, urban planning, a wide range of disciplines bringing the built environment together alongside architecture and design. So our research is really about shaping cities, shaping urban futures. My focus is very much on green infrastructure, nature in cities, but always linking it back to we do it for people. Why do we build the cities? How do we make it more livable? So some of the projects range from child-friendly spaces and child-friendly cities to runnability in cities to, more the green infrastructure planning and how we can do that from a more strategic perspective. I've also been working quite a bit with the UN Habitat, so on the Sustainable Development Goals, and through the Commonwealth Association of Planners, been very active in the climate action policies, but it's again shaping those conversations to help us build sustainable cities.
So let's dive on in and start by talking about green infrastructure. I love how you call it nature and our cities. I think that's really warming and I don't know, I just love it. It sounds more personal than green infrastructure, but so we'll talk about it in both ways. But like research undertaken by the Heart Foundation of Australia as part of their Healthy Active by Design program supports the importance of good design in improving people's health. And when it comes to nature, a simple thing like street trees along a footpath is more likely to get residents walking for 60 minutes each week. And residents with large neighbourhood parks within 1,600 metres of their home are likely to engage for an additional 150 minutes more in recreational walking per week than those with smaller parks. I mean, these are important, I guess, outcomes that providing green infrastructure can achieve. For you, what does green infrastructure mean and why is it more than just a nice thing to have?
So it is nature in cities, but it's infrastructure because it's all connected. So while it is the parks and the green roofs and the street trees and the wetlands, it's an interconnected system. So as we would plan for freeways and highways, all linking our cities, green infrastructure is that piece of nature, but that's linking throughout our cities in order to bring these benefits. The literature tells you about all the benefits of green infrastructure. It relates back to ecosystem services. Those things we, to explain it maybe in a simple way, can be environmental benefits, something like cooling, stormwater management, air quality improvements. We also measure it in terms of social benefits. Those things are mental, physical health, like mentioned, biodiversity. There's a lot of research that shows even something like noise pollution can be reduced by 50% in areas that has green infrastructure or just more canopy cover. And then there's also the economic benefits, which is currently a contested one in the sense that it shows that green infrastructure and nature near properties can increase the values of those residential properties. So, I mean, while we are eager to increase, the property values, we are also in a current situation in Sydney where we are almost outpricing people from it. So it's almost like, do we make it so nice that we can't afford it? But then I think for me, it comes back to everybody needs access to that nature. It's not a specific area that needs to, it's not for specific communities to have that benefits. If we get urban planning right, everybody should have access to good nature and good infrastructure.
Yeah.
Also things like with the recent floodings and, well, even now with the rains coming down and everything is flooded, that is typically a green infrastructure problem to solve. So it's the sponges in our cities that needs to be in place and work as a network in order to channel those rainwaters. So yes, it's essentially nature in cities, but with the understanding that it's not a nice to have, it's not a luxury. This is how we need to build our cities if we want to have sustainable cities in future.
It's an essential element. What are some of the major challenges faced when trying to integrate green infrastructure into existing urban planning and development processes?
So ironically, we never planned cities with nature. We know how to build cities.
Very
we
true.
know how to build buildings and roads, and we are really good at that. And we never had to work with nature in order to build our cities. But where we are currently at, and with a global population and just urbanization trends, we can't be planning cities in the same way. So all of a sudden we are saying, nature's disappearing from our cities. We need to do it in a different way. How do we bring it back? But to be honest, we've never done it before, so we aren't set up to do it. So things like outdated regulations, our planning frameworks are still looking at a traditional planning approach, right? It's not geared to support green infrastructure planning. There's a perception that green infrastructure is a non-essential or is an add-on. It's not considered as the part we start by green infrastructure and then building our cities. We still struggle a lot with the funding mechanisms around it. So to build a business case, who owns it, who's going to maintain it, exactly like how we cost everything in terms of grey infrastructure. We have not done that for the green infrastructure because we never had to. And so, a lot of the things is the maintenance strategies. People believe in the benefits that it can bring, but who will maintain it and who's taking ownership of it? So it's really that whole business case around why we need it.
That's very true. It's a very interesting one with who will maintain it. I know with a lot of the developments that I've been associated with, and the developer will sit at the table and say, well, I can incorporate this amount of open space, or I can incorporate this park that can sit alongside this development, maybe if it's a master planning exercise. And often they do become the points of contention in that project going forward, because the council's sitting there saying, but we don't want it. You'll have to maintain it.
Yes.
We don't want it to be handed over to us.
Yes, exactly that. But then also, from a strategic view, from a state view, we need a plan that can fit all these pockets of parks and trees into one and maintain that as we maintain our roads.
Yeah.
So, but the ownership question is still very real. We don't allocate a piece of road to the building.
No.
That is governed by local authorities or state government, right?
Yes.
But then for green infrastructure, we expect a different way of doing it, even though it's infrastructure.
Yeah. There's no sort of like state agency that takes responsibility for them. I guess you've got the government architect, New South Wales architect, who has their green grid, and you have the Department of Planning and Housing and Infrastructure who are providing guidance. But in terms of it's quite different. I get what you're saying about say the Department of Transport for New South Wales, who takes responsibility for certain roads.
Whose role is it, right?
Yeah.
Whose role is it? And so while they are all making really good progress to advance this in terms of expectation, it's not 100% there in policy yet.
No.
So we are pushing for it because it needs to be there. But the question is, how would we then maintain it? We did a piece for a university in the Netherlands about value capturing. So they were dealing with the same thing, right? State governments or local governments will provide this infrastructure, but the real value capture is basically going to the community. We're doing this because fundamentally we believe we are building better and resilient communities by doing it. So even if we know now it might cost us more to do it, in the long run, there's a lot of benefits. But it's a different way of thinking than having your current budget now, knowing what you can do, build your road, and job's done. This is a longer term accountability.
So how does incorporating nature into cities contribute to environmental, social and economic benefits, especially in the context of densification? Do you think attention is being paid to green infrastructure planning at the same time that we are looking at increasing density?
My honest opinion is I don't think we are thinking enough about it. The housing crisis is very real. I mean, we don't have time to waste.
No.
We have to action it. The concern is if we do a big housing project now, looking back in 10 years' time, then only we might have realized what we have lost in the way by only focusing on the housing targets. So, I mean, it can be done together. You can have good, dense housing proposals that also incorporate principles of green infrastructure and of nature in cities. So it is if we are expecting that as part of the housing solution. Recently at the World Urban Forum last year in Cairo, the whole theme was around housing, and the conclusion was basically it's not about housing, it's about homes. And so if we think about the housing crisis in terms of creating homes, then the need for that great environment surrounding all of those houses should also be in place.
Yes.
So it's not only a target, it's a livability question. And the things that we shape now will shape our city. To me, we don't have an option. We do have to do it hand in hand in order to reach all of those benefits that we know green infrastructure can provide. The flip side of it is we do not provide it and we lose out on all of those things that we could have had. And then it would be irreversible.
Yeah, because I mean, once we start getting more density, we might get Torrens title ownership, then going to strata ownership. It becomes very difficult to ever get a land, buyback to actually go back in and create large areas of open space.
Yes, true. But even things like reducing heat in cities.
Yeah.
Do we know enough about the modelling in dense areas to know how to counter those heat impacts or noise pollution or space for children to play and the impacts of children not being able to play and then shaping them as adults? Do we know enough about that modelling and prediction of what our current decisions would shape in future?
Yeah. No, it's a hugely important area. Has the government reached out to you at all to your research lab to look at any modelling in this field?
We are in constant conversations in shaping this green infrastructure debate. That's why the UTS Green Infrastructure Lab was created. And it's pretty much drawing in transdisciplinary group of people. So it's the architects, it's the planners, it's the developers. We work with science, engineering. We've got local government, City of Sydney, Committee of Sydney. We've got a lot of stakeholders that's contributing to this, really understanding we need to get it right. I don't think we're getting it right at the moment, but we are shaping a lot of scenarios of what can work and what cannot work. I think currently for us, it's actually a principle in urban ecology that's called safe to fail. So we are currently exploring with options and models that if we do not get it right, we can still adapt. As a university, I think that is our role, right? To pilot those projects and see where it's going and what is safe and what is not safe. If you have a green building and all of a sudden the walls start to fall off, it's not great publicity for green infrastructure at all. Yes, so but there needs to be a space to prototype these things and then to scale, because currently it is still expensive. Any developer that opts in to have a green building, is doing that mainly not as a financial incentive, but believing that is the way it should be. So we are trying to pilot things and make things work in order to be more cost effective, in order for it to be scaled up.
You've talked about the need to build a business case for green infrastructure. What are the barriers to funding and maintaining green infrastructure in our cities? You've touched on some of them.
Yes. So, well, in essence, for me, it's just we aren't set up. We never had to build this case to protect nature in our cities, and all of a sudden we're confronted with, wow, if you just look at snapshots on Google Images and you compare it 10 years ago to now, in most areas you would see green space has disappeared. So it's a global trend. So yes, we've never built this business case to support it. So things like we know the upfront costs, but we do not know enough about the long-term savings. And so that often gets overlooked. Yeah. We just focus on, it's going to be expensive and difficult to do it now. And the future benefits, it's too far ahead in future, like we can't capitalize on it now. But it's also really that thing of who owns green infrastructure. We ran a quick pilot project across the built environment professionals, and we basically asked people, who's responsible to plan green infrastructure? And so the architects said the planners said the engineers said, so it's not a profession that's responsible for it. It's very transdisciplinary, but that's also part of the problem, like who shapes this and who comes together. I do think the lack of valuation frameworks to capture the value and to really understand that value, and then limited policy incentives for developers to really, do this piece of work and to scale it up. It's currently a nice to have. It's currently not a necessity, although if you look at the literature and the research being done, we can't afford to have it as a luxury. It 100% is a necessity.
Who do you think should be responsible for it?
Well, everybody, really, because this will benefit communities, right? But practically, we would need the very early stages of any plan or development needs to understand that's where green infrastructure happens. It's not the landscape architects coming in at the end of the project to make it look nice.
No.
So at the onset, part of your project planning should be who's in charge of your green infrastructure plan. I mean, if that could be guided from state and local government, it would be great as a starting point, this needs to be in place before we can even consider any planning application or development. But it would be a team approach. Planners can come in from a strategic point of view. The reason why we work with science is they know how these plants should grow, right? It's my plan to grow plants and they know how it can grow, right? And then we need the engineers to help us make sure it can grow in the location where we want it to grow.
Yes.
So it's bringing all those different elements together in order to grow nature in areas in the cities where, previously it was not needed. And it's hard to grow plants in the carbon world.
Have you seen it done well in one particular country?
Yes, I do think in Europe, in the UK, there's really good examples. Singapore is a really good example. It can be done, definitely can be done. It is being done, right? So that's why there's a global push towards it. We work quite a bit with the UK. That's, I would say, far advanced in terms of their policies underlying the need for it. And it's formed part of how they do urban planning and how they think about cities.
Right.
So it can definitely be done. It needs a bit of political will, and it needs, good research into the context of what we are doing. I mean, we can't just replicate what Singapore's doing. It's a very different context here, or even in the UK. But it can be done. There's really good examples. And there's actually some great examples from architects, developers, planners in different places doing really great work with advancing green infrastructure.
Can you share a couple of those?
There's some good examples in London where they are doing green buildings. I'm referring back to the London Green Infrastructure Plan that they've created.
Okay.
It's basically a regional plan for green infrastructure, and then pockets of that is being developed, from buildings to stormwater management channels. That's all focused on green infrastructure. We also have a project with colleagues in Norway, Stavanger University, And they've got a neighbourhood that they've tried to remodel from green infrastructure only. So they went away from the traditional grey stormwater systems, and it's all nature-based. So it's plants and cobbles and channeling stormwater through natural ways. The Netherlands, also a really good example of what you can do if you plan with nature. With them, it's very much the water-based approach to it, but they understand how you work with water, how you not only develop and then, be surprised when the rain comes or the floods come. So there's some really good examples of how planning aligns with nature in order to build sustainable environments.
In something like the UK Green Infrastructure Plan, does it look to identify, say, private sector responsibilities as opposed to, say, government responsibilities?
I am not fully across it. So my understanding of that plan is that it's a strategic vision of how it should be, but it's in partnership, of course, because there's some parts that is still developing or the developer's responsibility to go take that and do that. But it's set within a policy guideline that says this is our expectation.
Yeah.
At the moment, in Sydney, for instance, we always, as part of a planning application, there's a part where you need to explain the sustainability of the project.
Yes.
And so the question is, could that be how it linked with the Green Infrastructure Plan?
Yeah.
Can that be a policy requirement? And I think that's where the UK is more advanced. It's part of their thinking now.
I'm not aware that we do, but you're more informed than me on the subject. But do we have anything akin to a green infrastructure plan?
I won't say green infrastructure plan. We've got, parts of policies calling on it.
Yes.
But it's still not a requirement.
No.
There's a movement towards it. There's a big understanding of this is what we should be doing.
Yeah.
It would be fantastic the day that we have a green infrastructure plan for Sydney or for New South Wales to manage it as a network, as a bigger thing that's coming together.
Yeah, we have our regional plans that identifies open space and open space corridors and our green grid policies and things like that. But when you start putting something out there like the green infrastructure plan, it sounds very serious, doesn't it? You sort of you sort of think, oh yeah, that's.
But it should be. It's a strategic plan for more than just, a row of trees or a park or a green building. Like that should all fit into it. But ideally, there needs to be this high-level vision of how we support our city through infrastructure that is nature.
Can you share, you touched on it, a slightly sort of deviating, but still in the same topic of green infrastructure, and you touched on it in the outset. But can you share, I guess, more insights from your research on the correlation between green spaces and property values, particularly in cities like Sydney?
So in broad, the research shows 15% increase when you're in close proximity to a park or any nature. And if you have a view on that specific green infrastructure or park, there's a 20% increase in property value. So it's a significant increase. But then, if you look at it from a neighbourhood perspective, it's all those things about, appeal and the functional value. So it's probably cooler neighbourhoods, reduced noise. So there's measurable things, and then there's these indirect benefits where you live in a healthier space. So yes, property values definitely increase, but so many other benefits living in great neighbourhoods. What makes a great neighbourhood, right?
Well, and a healthy neighbourhood. We've, I touched on it at the outset as well. Some of the work from the Heart Foundation of Australia, and some of their evidence, based statistics that are coming out of I guess the value of putting green spaces. People living near green spaces is quite phenomenal when you look at what it does to lowering cardiovascular disease, the risk of stroke, reduction in obesity. Like there's so many different, isn't it? There's so many when you start putting the layers of benefits.
Yes.
There's
a study that was done in the UK with hospital patients, and the one group had a view of the parking lot, and the other group had a view of the park. and they had a significant faster recovery from people that had a view over the park area. And so just that, even if you can just see nature, it has a positive impact. I mean, if we then talk kids that's allowed to play in parks versus very dense areas, and if we are losing our spaces to play in our cities, what type of adults are we shaping, right? So the long-term impacts and the social and emotional impacts, we will probably, have this podcast in 10 years' time and then say, oh, goodness, now we see what we've done to society. So I think the thing is, the cities are still in a shape where we can protect what we have, but we really need to protect what we have. Yeah, otherwise, we're going to lose it. And so again, back to the housing crisis and the push for development, that is real and we need to address it, but also in a way that we can create a sustainable future, which is a very tricky conversation at the moment, but it can be done.
Yeah, well, we're very easy, isn't it, with planning to get siloed thinking. You focus on one specific issue and that becomes the focus of, every policy directive.
Yes.
And we sort of lose sight of that sort of holistic vision that we need to be having.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about active transportation and livability. And when we were getting ready for the podcast, you mentioned that you are a very keen runner and that you used your passion for running to help you, I guess, with your research about active transportation and movability. So let's start by defining the term. What do you mean by the term active transportation?
Active transportation for me is how we can physically walk and move through our cities and not use traditional ways like vehicles or our buses. So how we can, be active and move. The whole concept of runnability of cities was born through this because we've got an urban planning group. It's actually a global group. And every time at a conference, this group would just go off and do a city run. It actually resulted in workshops being renamed run shops. And it was quite fabulous because when you run the city, you have a quick overview of, the city, the people, how the movement works, but also the challenges, right? Like running in Jakarta one year where you can hardly breathe due to air pollution. You can hardly run due to just traffic everywhere. To the next year, we were in Belgium, and it was fabulous, right? Running along the canal, and it's beautiful. So you get to understand a lot about the city by running through the city. So this whole concept about runnability of cities started by, I want to say, a group of bit of crazy urban planning runners. But it got a bit of traction because it's built under urban design principles, right? So it's about safe and connected pedestrian walkways. But then more than a walkway, you need that movement. So back to active transportation, right? If you have good movement, people would probably, hopefully, run or walk there. But how do we design it to be safe, to be, not interfering with traffic, to be green, to have water stops? How do we design those cities to enable active transportation? And I mean the term runnability. If it's a runnable space, it's probably a really good walkable space, and it's probably a really good child-friendly space, right? So it's broader than runnability, but we like the term runnability. On that project, we're actually looking at Strava heat maps. So Strava is that app where you log your running or cycling data,
right?
And it's really evident to see how that even relates back to nature in cities, because where people run or have those active mobility is really, alongside our beaches or at parks. And then looking at that maps, it really tells you something about equity and, our distribution, even just in Sydney.
Yes.
Where's our, in brackets, nice neighbourhoods that, can provide a quality of life. So it comes back to nature. This whole runnability thing comes back to nature in cities and how we enable healthy communities. So it's a very interesting piece of work at the moment, and to also then take it to neighbourhoods that we think, why aren't there active mobility? Why aren't people running there? How can we design it better for people to feel that they can be running there or cycling there? So again, it comes back to healthy communities. That is a fundamental principle of urban planning.
Let's talk about children and density and livability, which you've started to touch on. In some of your research, you're examining livability from the perspective of children. How does city density impact children's safety and livability?
So we are currently having a World University Network project that's with partners from the UK, from Brazil, from Africa, from China, from New Zealand. And we're actually talking about what is density, because in various contexts, what we perceive as dense is definitely not dense in China, or vice versa, right? The African interpretation of what is dense is not true for New Zealand. And so we have this whole conversation about what is dense and what is density, and when does density become dangerous, meaning it's too dense for us to live healthy in those spaces. So linking that back to children, for us, it's really about the lack of safe play spaces. So if it becomes so dense that we don't have safe play spaces, it's borderlining dangerous for our communities. If there's no green buffers or no traffic calming measures, it's not safe for our children. Some of the research showed that if it's a really high apartment building, that parents would not allow their kids to go play in the green space below because it's too far, right? Yeah. Like we're too high up, we can't see you. Yes. So that means kids are trapped indoors, high above the city. Yep. So what does that mean in terms of children's development and what we know about healthy, progression for a child?
And confidence.
Confidence, yes. So child-friendly spaces is really about independent mobility. Is it safe enough for a child to go there on his own or her own and play and be safe in that space? And so I think for us, the thing we do not understand at the moment is, would this be true in very dense areas? It's compact and there's less visibility. And so what would that mean for safety for children and independent mobility?
How do you go to set up research to investigate this?
So this current project, we draw on the expertise from our global researchers to understand density and what they mean by density and what is good density. So we're trying to come up with a typology of This is the range of densities. And in this specific project, we worked with our partner in Brazil, who did a lot of studies with children to say, where do you feel safe? What do you like? Why do you play here? What's your favorite place? Like if you could play anywhere, where would you go? So really engaging children to understand, their boundaries of where they feel safe. And it might seem like a very, normal thing to do, but this is not part of the current literature. Like children is not involved in city planning.
No.
Right?
No.
We plan for children, but children's never been part of that. So, that's the one way. There's also a bit of work that's being done in the International Center for Local Democracy. It's a Swedish-based organization that does a lot of work in Africa with communities and with children. So there's a whole, we actually reframed it from child-friendly cities to child-focused cities. And that piece of work is looking at the Sustainable Development Goals and how it's really written for adults, right? But if you write the Sustainable Development Goals for children, how it would look, what would mean no poverty or access to water or safe spaces? It's different than our view of what adults need for it. So there's a big conversation around how do we change policy to be more supportive of children, but then also working with children to say, tell us how you feel safe. In South Africa, we once did a study where the children was playing in the canals, and there's actually a lot of deaths occurred because it's not safe for them to play, but it was the only space that they could play. And so we then said, why aren't you playing at school? But schools were closed off. So after school, you need to leave because there's nobody looking after children. Yes. So it became a bit of a societal problem. Like, all right, we can't have them in the canals. They're not allowed at school. So how do we shape the space for them to play? It was actually a beautiful project. The university students got some sponsors and created a child-friendly space. Sounds very fancy, but it was really just grass and some motorcycles that they got sponsored, and they laid out this footpath and this motorcycling path for them, fenced it off in the middle of the community. And it was, for the students, it was like a quick 24-hour project, really to understand the principles of urban design. And 5 years later, that space is still being used because it's the only safe space that community has. So there's ways where small changes can have a really big impact. But there's definitely a really big need to think about our children and what is safe and how we plan for them. Even in Australia, I mean, we have the best parks and child-friendly play spaces. It's remarkable. But how do we take that as part of city planning? How do we extend those good principles into our city?
Well, particularly when we're looking at, as you know, we've talked about increasing density, yet it doesn't seem to be on the table as part, you know, the current pressure is all about housing, and as we've said, it should be, and the benefits that are being delivered are being measured in affordable housing components of these schemes, and the rest is sort of not on the table at the moment, is it?
Yes, although we know the ingredients needed to shape sustainable cities and sustainable community.
How do we balance then the urgent need to solve housing shortages with this equally important need to maintain or enhance urban livability? How do we get the conversation on the table? You've been part of your background, which is so impressive, is the way you've collaborated and brought, I guess, whether it's government or communities or developers together. How do we orchestrate change here?
If I can have a magic wand, it would be to have that green infrastructure plan that is a strategic plan for a big region, right, as the starting point. This is our expectation. Everything from here onwards will feed into this bigger plan because we know this is how we can build sustainable futures. And if we do not do this, we are probably not building a great future. So for me, it's really embedding green infrastructure as the starting point of any of those conversations and not as a trade-off. You know, it's not if I build this and I take out 100 trees, I'll replant the 100 trees next door. It's no, how can you build what you want to build with those 100 trees intact? How can we keep it as is? So it's not a trade-off. It's let us as humans accommodate the nature and respect the nature that we are building on. I mean, a lot of it is coming back with design with country principles, right? Like starting at the heart of it, listening to local knowledge, understanding the land you're on and respecting those principles and then building. I also think it's really important that communities are involved early on because in any community engagement piece, they will tell you they want nature, they want space for their kids, they want to feel safe. Then they tell you, oh, and I might need housing, right? Like there's fundamental things that humans need. And so if we have the communities involved early on, when we shape these whatever new areas we are planning or building, I think the green infrastructure principles will be highlighted. And then, yes, as I said, we should remember in this whole crisis, housing crisis, we are building homes. And so if that is our view of it, I do think there's a level of understanding that it's not only a numbers game, but that there's quality and accountability and the longer term sustainability that we also need to get right. We've got a once-off opportunity.
Yes.
If we get this wrong, it's going to be really bad. If we get this right, it can be fantastic.
Yeah, I certainly think in the government's recently released pattern book for low, medium density housing, I think some of those designs have got it right.
Yes, definitely.
I think that body of work that has been led by the Minister for Planning and Public Spaces and the government architect is
100%.
Has absolutely, I guess, achieved a really good balance.
Yes.
And, to quote Anthony Albanese in his victory speech, does represent the Australian way.
Yes.
It does. I think it's going to, once it gains momentum and and those patterns start being built, it's actually going to not only is the housing sustainable, and I think it's great that they've brought out the landscaping guidelines to go with it. I know that what you're talking about is a lot bigger than a set of landscaping guidelines, but at least it's a start.
Yes.
But I think also importantly, those designs are going to bring about a different social context.
Yes.
Take us back to that sense of, I guess, where you could lean over the fence and borrow a cup of sugar.
Yes.
Get
community living.
Get community living back on track, get us talking to neighbours again, not shutting us away.
Yes.
So I was very encouraged to see the launch of the pattern book.
Yes. No, look, there's fabulous initiatives.
Yeah.
The innovation in the space of green infrastructure alone, it's really picking up. It's exciting. It's really exciting. It's a question of how do we scale this and how do we do it quick enough and how do we, prototype and pilot things and be safe to fail where we're now at in order to create the solutions that could stand and could uphold this future. But it's really exciting. The amount of PhD students that come to us to say, I want to do a doctoral degree in green infrastructure, it's the younger generation are very aware that this is where it's heading and this is where it will be happening. So yes, it's really for us to put this puzzle together and bring all these innovative ideas and energy together to shape our city. I'm always thinking about that book that says cities for people, right? And it's very ironic, but yes, we're building cities for people. So maybe for a couple of years there we were building cities for economic reasons or for development reasons. But in essence, cities should be for people. And I think, that was the lesson from COVID as well, right? If you take the people out of the city, you don't have a city.
You don't have a city, no.
So how do we create cities for people?
And COVID, I think that was most probably a refreshing insight.
Yes.
For us all to get.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes. If the city is only there as your workplace, then all of a sudden, if you don't have to work there, you lose the people. So how do we, the conversations then was, how do you get people back into the city? What is it that the city should offer? But that's urban planning 101, right?
Yeah.
How do we create great neighborhoods? How do we create great spaces? You create them for people. And so a big part of that is people need nature.
I want to talk more about the collaboration work that you do. As I said earlier, I think, planners, we can very much work in a siloed environment, and collaboration fuels innovation and fuels change. What are some of the successful examples of collaboration between architects, planners, engineers, local governments and communities that you have seen or worked on? I know when we were preparing for the podcast, you mentioned a couple of them. Please share them.
Yes. So through my connections with the Commonwealth planners, I work a lot with the Commonwealth Architects, Commonwealth Engineering Council, Commonwealth Local Government Forum. And so those four entities alongside the King's Foundation basically came together on an initiative called the Commonwealth Sustainable Cities Initiative. And that is really to shape a declaration on urban sustainability and sustainable urban development. You can think these big global organizations, what will come from it. But it is so remarkable to see if those different professions come together and talk about sustainability and what we as planners perceive to be sustainable, what architects think should be sustainable, engineers, and then local government. And then all of a sudden shape a declaration that from all of our perspective, this is what we can do to enhance sustainable urban development. That resulted in a competencies piece of work. Like what is the competency that's needed for built environment professionals going out into the industry to build cities that's fit for climate change or for the floods or for the heat or for all these urban problems that's coming? Can we still have the same set of competencies like we had 10 years ago? Or how should education respond to this? How do we bring those professional, even CPD development, right? How do we bring that back into our professionals quick enough, but also flexible enough to upskill? Because all of a sudden the world looks much different than it did 10 years ago. So how do we upskill? So it's those bodies coming together has, I want to say, the power to influence policy and to influence educational approaches, accreditation of programs. And because it's a collective effort, it is stronger. It is, they call it BPIC, the Built Environment Professionals in the Commonwealth, has launched with this idea that as professionals across the Commonwealth, we should share some of these competencies. If you get a planning degree in Australia, it should be aligned well enough for you to go do work in South Africa.
Yes.
There's basic things in there that we as planners need to understand, that professionals in the built environment needs to understand. There's things that architects are doing that planners should be aware of. And so how do we come together? That's on a Commonwealth scale. There's a lot of good work, people collaborating. On a local scale, I refer to the Green Infrastructure Lab that's really built on, it's not one specific profession's responsibility. It's the architects, the planners, the developers, the construction managers, our friends in science and in engineering, health. So the power of that group is that it draws expertise across the university to talk about people in cities, really,
Yes.
right? How do we get this right to advance this piece of work? The other example that I can give maybe is a shout out to my colleagues that's doing the Northern Rivers Living Lab. That's also really a good example of how it's transdisciplinary. The piece of work being done in Lismore in terms of recovery, it's drawing on expertise from everywhere, right? So yes, planners are very central in it, but it's the landscape architects, it's the developers, it's the local communities, it's photographers, it's the media, it's everybody is involved in shaping that narrative around how do we do this better? How do we learn from this living lab experience? So, I believe in the power of transdisciplinary planning. I think the world is too complex for us to think, planners can save it or the architects can do it, or we need to be working together. And just taking it back to the university, that is also what we are really thinking about, programs that's overlapping or new ideas of bringing these disciplines together, having different cohorts of students working together to get this understanding of the complexity of the world in order to have those competencies to go out and go change.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love the idea of the universities working cooperatively with the government.
Yes.
Because I think as soon as we start, evidence-based planning is, to me, what makes a difference. And
Yes.
It makes communities sit up and start to listen. And I think having that collaboration between the research labs, like your own, and at all of the various universities, and having that connection to actively inform government policy at either federal, state, and local government level is really powerful.
Yeah, I agree. A wonderful thing that happened actually a month or so ago, it started, is universities starting to work together on green infrastructure.
Fantastic.
Also realizing it's not a university problem or a theme or a lab.
No.
If we want to really solve this, if we want to get it right in Sydney, in New South Wales, in Australia, we need to be working together. And together you've got a stronger voice, but you can also draw on all those different expertise to do it quicker, hopefully better, and scale. So it was great. It's great to see that universities are actually starting to also talk about these things, and it's not, it's not about who gets the grants. It's about we want to change it. We really believe in what we should be doing to progress our city.
Yeah, no, that becomes very exciting. Very exciting. Let's talk about community involvement and community engagement. In your experience, what are some of the shortcomings of, the current public consultation and community engagement processes in urban development, and how do you think they can be improved?
I think we fall back on traditional ways of doing it, and it's a bit of a tick box, right? I think communities have lost interest in participating, because we don't always see the participation and how it shaped a conversation. So, yes, that feedback loops is not always clear.
Do you think they've lost faith in it? Do you think they just feel they don't really feel like they're being heard, even when they do get on board and have their say?
I think so. Well, that's the feedback that we get from research pieces that we're doing, is people's almost saying, oh, right, another survey, what's going to happen with it?
Yeah.
How do I shape the conversation? So I think, that feedback loop to communities to say, why are we consulting in the first place, right? Like we have to be very clear on that ladder of the participation. Is this only to get your information? Are you part of decision making? Are you part of what's the expectation? So be clear about it. But I also think there's room for creative participation methods. We've trialed this with the university in Europe, where it was about different ways of creative participatory approaches, even from handing somebody a camera and say, film what you think is beautiful in the space. As an alternative to say, what do you like? Getting youth involved, having big boards in the city and handing out markers and say, go write one word that you feel when you walk by. So different ways of engaging and getting people excited to be part of it, but then also just really being clear on, the expectation and how this will shape up. And then we really need to be better at feeding back what happened with that consultation.
Yeah, I agree with that.
If it went to something. If not, why not? But it's part that we can also educate our communities to be responsible citizens when it comes to these engagement pieces.
No, it's interesting what you're saying about the cameras, because I remember I love a technique just called a community walk, where I take people around with the urban designer or the architect, and we basically explain how a project's going to come out of the ground, whether that's using, artist impressions taken from certain angles or whatever. Yeah. But usually, as part of those walks, I love giving people Polaroid cameras and doing exactly what you're talking about, saying, take a photograph of what you don't like, take a photograph of what you really love. And yeah, I mean, it's a great way to, I guess, get people to become quite active in the process.
Yeah, definitely. So there's different ways, right? It's not only also during COVID, we did a study on virtual participation.
Oh, cool.
And, if more people were able to participate or not, that in Africa, you definitely excluded a big part that did not have access to that, right? And so we're back to who's participating and who's deciding on behalf of who. The Faculty of Society, Design and Society, we have strategic communication PhD students working on that piece as a communications piece, right? How do we communicate? But then also we have students in housing looking basically at the same problem, but from a housing supply perspective. So all of a sudden bringing communication and architecture into the same room, it's the same problem, but from two different perspectives. So for me, that's where the future is heading. It's bringing in these very diverse disciplines to solve our really complex problems. Yeah, and to, again, just do it for the people, right? For real intent, for why we are shaping sustainable communities and sustainable cities.
Looking forward, what gives you hope for creating more sustainable, livable cities in our rapidly urbanising world?
Most definitely our younger generations. If you need a bit of a feel-good moment, you can go and walk on campus and have a discussion with any of our PhD students on how passionate they are about what they are doing, how they see the future, how they feel they are contributing. The current students in the classes like to work on real-world problems, right? They tell us, don't give us an assignment that's based on some fictional something. Get us into industry, show us a real problem, have an industry partner there, and help. We would like to help shape those solutions. So they are driven by real-world impact. They understand where it's heading. I think they understand technology more than we do. So I really think that, for me, that's the hope. The younger generation gets this, and they are very keen to make a difference. I also think there's a big awareness that we should be doing things better. As we said, like there's already a lot of examples of great work. So that realization and awareness that we can do better, that is there.
Yes.
It's now to move to the actual let's do it.
Yeah.
I think the other thing for me is cities are really learning from each other. And that network between cities is really great. Initiative like the Sustainable Cities Initiative that's running through the UN Habitat, it's great, where Brisbane, for example, is leading the Sustainable City Network in that sense by showing how they are meeting the targets and what they've put in place to meet that. So cities learning from cities, I think it's a great thing to move us forward. Yes, and then for me, it's really universities working closer with industry and with government. That's ideally the role of universities, right? To help shape those pieces of information and bring it back to have actual real life impact.
Yeah.
So that's the pieces that I think it's not all doom and gloom. It's happening and it's exciting, and it's a matter of how can we do it faster and in a clever way, and make good decisions that we know will benefit our cities in a long, many years to come from here.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of those insights today. I really enjoyed hearing about your research and all the different collaborations that you're involved with.
Thank you very much. You're doing a really great job for us too, because you are promoting our work and cities and the importance of people in cities.
Well, thank you. I'll take that as well. I sincerely hope that a statewide green infrastructure plan isn't too far away.
Oh, that would be the fantastic day for us. Well, not for us, for many generations to come would benefit from a vision like that.
And I hope that it could potentially be a piece of work that all of our wonderful universities are involved with.
Yes, that would be the ideal.
It would be. It would actually be the ideal. So thank you very much again.
Thank you.
If you have any questions or thoughts to share, click the link in our show notes. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're a developer or working on a project that needs an online presence or stronger community engagement, reach out through the same link. Alternatively, you can visit urbantalk.com.au. Don't forget to follow, leave a rating and a review. It really helps more people find the podcast and keeps the conversation going. I'm Belinda Barnett, and thank you for listening to the Urban Talk podcast.